So there's a lot of updates here, and I just want to go through all the pieces of what has transpired since last we spoke. You guys remember there was a whole controversy over two guests that Rogan had on, Dr. Robert Malone, Dr. Peter McCullough. There was, he was accused of spreading misinformation, and there was a lot of concern around his take on vaccines. So that was the initial foray, the initial tax on Rogan. He then comes out and essentially apologizes, says, look, I'm going to do better. I'm going to have people on with a variety of views. I'm going to try to be better prepared. I hear your criticism. I'm going to try to do better. So that sort of starts to die down.
It basically is dead after he puts out the video.
Yeah,
and
so
he has
then,
that compiled thing where he goes, well, this was misinformation. He destroys their narrative in a single video.
Yes. So then they've got to try another tactic because they've sensed like a little bit of blood in the water. And a little bit of concern from Spotify, who of course had decided to put labels on any of his podcasts that have COVID information. So then this video compilation emerges of Rogan over years of his podcasts, and these all came from years in the past, saying the N-word. And it's just him saying the word. There's no context around it, so you have no idea what context in which he said it. Of course, we come to learn this is when he's quoting other comedians.
Right.
He's debating, when this person used it and what that meant. So this is definitely not him like using this as a slur at people. But you look at the video and it looks absolutely terrible, right? So then at the same time, let's go ahead and put this element on the screen. People start to notice that a bunch of his old episodes are getting pulled from Spotify. And if you look at this list, this is a handful of the ones that get pulled. Ultimately now, I think it's up to over like 110 different episodes that have been pulled. You can see some of the people are those you might expect, people like Alex Jones, and other ones you're like, wait, what? like Kyle Kalinske, as one example. They also pulled down The Amazing Atheist, Duncan Trussell. I mean, just
Michael Malice,
across the board.
Vaughn.
Right, and so there's been this sort of narrative of, these must be the episodes where he said the N-word. Definitely not the case, because number one, he didn't say it nearly as many times as 130 episodes or whatever. And number two, I mean, Kyle remembers his episode with Rogan. There were no racial slurs involved, so this is happening. The next piece is that under pressure, Rogan comes out and makes a really fulsome apology for language that he's used in the past, jokes that he's told in the past that he himself finds to be offensive and racist. Let's take a listen to a little bit of Joe's apology.
Hello, friends. I'm making this video to talk about the most regretful and shameful thing that I've ever had to talk about publicly. There's a video that's out that's a compilation of me saying the N-word. It's a video that's made of clips taken out of context of me of 12 years of conversations on my podcast, and it's all smushed together, and it looks fucking horrible, even to me. Now, I know that to most people, there's no context where a white person is ever allowed to say that word, never mind publicly on a podcast. And I agree with that now. I haven't said it in years, but for a long time, when I would bring that word up, like if it would come up in conversation, instead of saying the N-word, I would just say the word. I thought as long as it was in context, people would understand what I was doing. Like that.
And so the very latest piece, and we can put this, jump forward to A5. We got a email from Spotify to their employees giving sort of their view of what happened here. This is from the CEO, Daniel Ek. He says, and this is a long letter, I won't read it all, but I'll read a portion here. He says, there are no words I can say to adequately convey how deeply sorry I am for the way the Joe Rogan Experience controversy continues to impact each of you. Not only are some of Joe's comments incredibly hurtful, I want to make clear they do not represent the values of the company. I know this situation leaves many of you feeling drained, frustrated, and unheard. This is also significant, the second paragraph, so keep this up. I think it's important you're aware that we've had conversations with Joe and his team about some of the content in his show, including his history of using some racially insensitive language. Following these discussions and his own reflection, he chose to remove a number of episodes from Spotify. He also issued his own apology over the weekend. Go ahead and put A6 up on the screen now. This is another portion of this letter, kind of the conclusion. They go on to talk about, we really want to make sure that we're thinking about this, that I've had conversations. Some have been supportive, others have been incredibly hard. All of them made me think. One of the things I'm thinking about is what additional steps we can take to further balance creator expression with user safety. I've asked our teams to expand the number of outside experts we consult with on these efforts and look forward to sharing more details. And the long and short of it, kind of the headline from this letter that Daniel Ek sends to his employees there at Spotify is that do not believe that canceling Joe Rogan is the solution. So, Saagar, that kind of brings us up to date with more or less what has transpired. Let me just say a couple things, then I'll hand it to you for your reaction. First of all, the elephant in the room, of course, for us is that we're friends with Joe. We like Joe, and not only that, but Joe has been incredibly good to us. He helped us, when not only did he have us on his show twice, but when we were thinking of going independent.
It's the first call.
He was the person that said to us, do it, I'll have your back, I know you guys can make it. Like, we were very nervous about it, and he was extraordinarily encouraging. So there's no doubt that, we are not neutral or unbiased in this. However, I also want to say that I think if you look at our record of defending people that we like and people we really, really don't like, when it comes to free speech issues, I think you will see a very consistent pattern. You only have to look to last week when we were defending Whoopi Goldberg and Dan Bongino, I think, to see that, we've had a pretty consistent take on this issue.
I'm glad you said that. And this is important too. Look, I'm trying to take my emotion out of this and look at this dispassionately, as if I had never met Joe Rogan, as if he never helped us out in the way that he did. I won't be perfect about it, but take that obviously with a grain of salt. Understand where I'm trying to come from. When I see this, I see Spotify trying to have the best of all worlds. They want Rogan without the warts, but they also want his 11 million listeners. I saw it described as from a podcast expert, like a media person, that Joe's episodes are akin to a Taylor Swift album per day on the platform.
Wow.
In terms of their economic value, just to get people to try and understand what that means in terms of user engagement, driving subscription, and all of that. The problem that I have with this statement is that he's like, look, canceling Joe is the wrong thing, but balancing listenership with user safety. Oh man, here, if you had thought labels were enough, then the experts. Anytime the experts start to get involved, I know that the anti-racist hucksters are marching on in. And even worse within this is he says that I'm going to be dedicating $100 million to historically marginalized communities and artists. What the hell does that mean? Once again, you are basically paying off, the opposition in order to keep quiet so that they'll come onto your platform and not say anything. And also, if you think that paying them off is going to work, I have news for you. Go and see how it's worked out at almost every other company. That's the big problem that I have with this statement. In terms of the actual events themselves, this is all hypocrisy. I'm sorry. Our president, and I put this out there, has said the N-word, while quoting it in public in the year 1985. Do I think that that's what makes him a racist? No. But when you strip context out of everything, that's what's going to happen. Dave Portnoy put out a statement. I'll be talking about some of that in my monologue. People have been going after him because he was, singing along to lyrics of a Ja Rule song while introducing Ja Rule 5 years ago. And they're like, this is what makes you a racist. No, that's outrageous. We either live in a society with context or don't. Should Joe have said it? Probably not, okay? I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. What do you do,
He obviously agrees with that.
Yeah, and I think he agrees with that now too. Should he have been saying this? But also consider the times. 10 years ago was a really long time. Some of these jokes and other things. I remember also that our former president, Barack Obama, who Joe loves, made big headlines when he went on Mark Maron's podcast, 2016, and said, I don't want racial politics in this country to come down to whether you can say the N-word or not. He actually fully said the N-word on the podcast. Listen to Obama, okay? Obama is the one who actually came out and said this. I'll be the only guy to defend Joe and quote Obama at the same time. But I'm just trying to put this in a societal point of view. Howard Stern, so many people in public life, many of the people who were trying to cancel Joe themselves, some guy, Winslow, I'll be talking about him tomorrow, who got The Rock to denounce Joe Rogan, and I'll also be, do a full thing on that. Well, he himself used the N-word many times in his books. My point is, let's not play this game, okay? Let's not try and assume, the character and the fulsomeness of someone's soul based upon a very maliciously cut clip from a very suspect group that I'll also be digging into.
So I think it's important to deal with the actual statements that were made, saying the N-word over and over again. Again, I think the context of this really matters. That doesn't excuse it. But clearly Joe was saying he hasn't done this in a long time. Yeah. He had already realized this was not a good thing for him as a white dude to be saying. He comes out and apologizes. But the problem is, it's really not about the N-word or the anti-vax information. It's really not about that. Keep in mind, as you were pointing out, first of all, there's a huge amount of power and money in play here.
This is massive.
He is the tent pole of Spotify and their podcast outfit. He is the #1 podcast, not just here, but in 90 different markets for Spotify. So they have obviously huge vested interest here, and their competitors have a huge vested interest in hobbling him and in taking him down, because this has been massively significant for Spotify. So there's that piece. Then you have all the people, all the circle of people who, the media types, the sort of like corporate mainstream media types, who are jealous of Joe, who don't like the fact that they don't have control over what he says, who he has on. He hasn't been effectively, subjected to shame and control and coercion in the past. You have the fact that, now that he has this exclusive deal with Spotify, it sort of gave these people an opening.
It gave him a cudgel.
It gave him a cudgel. That's exactly the right word, because now it's no longer, look, Joe's doing his thing, and, what are you going to do about it? Because he's on his own, he's independent. Yes, at YouTube he was there, but he wasn't exclusive. He didn't have this big deal with them. He wasn't sort of like their product. He's just using their platform. So it was a different relationship. Now you have another place where you can apply pressure through the Spotify CEO, through their employees, who I'm sure were very distressed, and that they were sending a lot of you. We know from historic
distress.
Yes, from historic events as well, that there is at least some group of the Spotify employees who are very upset about all of this and how this is all going. Then you have the anti-vax direction, saying Malone and McCullough, who, look, I have my issues with those podcasts as well, which I talked about, in which we had Dr. Prasad on to go through the claims and talk about, which is the right way to handle these things. But so that doesn't really land. But Joe comes out and makes a statement, and Spotify puts these labels on the podcast. And that creates a little bit of blood in the water. Now, look, I don't blame Joe for doing that. I thought his comments were very gracious. I thought they were very heartfelt. And ultimately, when you're in these sorts of circumstances, like, you have to be true to yourself and respond to them in the way that is going to make you feel like you handled it in the best possible way. So I don't blame him for doing that, but I do think that put a little bit of blood in the water, and it sort of enabled this next very coordinated attack. Saagar's going to be breaking down in his monologue just how coordinated that is, but let's just say there's a Democratic super PAC involved to tell you how organic all of this outrage manufacture is. And then, just so you really know, this has nothing to do with like him saying the N-word or offensive language or whatever. Kyle and I were trying to rack our brains for what he said in his episode that might have gotten it pulled, because there certainly was I don't even think they talked about race in that entire, 3-hour-long discussion. But one thing they did talk about was Jamal Khashoggi and Saudi Arabia. And also, Kyle was very aggressive and very outspoken about the war that they're prosecuting in Yemen and how they're causing famine. He was very outspoken about some of their, sort of barbaric practices, public beheadings, and those sorts of things. Well, lo and behold, Spotify just like right now enabled podcasts in the Saudi market. Is that the reason why?
It's a great cover, though.
Could be.
Yeah.
Could be. But it's certainly not about sort of offensive language, because there was nothing in that podcast that would fall in that category. There also, I think they talked about Epstein as well, which was another thing that were like, interesting, maybe. But there was also a moment in there that was kind of a little bit prophetic, where they talked about the problem with censoring all of these independent media outlets. And look, I know Joe has a big contract for Spotify, so he's technically corporate media. But the whole fight over this is about the fact that corporate media has not been able to control him, has not been able to rein him in, has not been able to dictate who he has on and what he says and what sort of topics he covers. So that's why I make the distinction. But take a listen. This is A4 Control Room. Take a listen to some of what they had to say on that now banned podcast.
Speaking of social media, have you seen all these purges recently? There's a new round of it that just happened.
No, who got purged?
They're almost all alternative media accounts.
That's not good.
It is a scary time because you see that this can impact, really anybody who's not towing the line, if you will. The internet went through a phase of like just totally free and open, wild, wild west type thing. And now it looks like they're trying to reel it back in. And it's like, that's viewed as the public square. It's supposed to be that these social media outlets, which are so gigantic and so powerful, that this is now the public square. So to be able to censor people in these forums should be considered unconstitutional. Yeah.
Kind of ironic that that's the sort of conversation they were having on a podcast that you now cannot find anywhere.
I gotta be honest, I'm kind of offended that we didn't get taken off neither of our episodes. I guess I wasn't hardcore
We weren't
enough.
edgy enough.
If we're lucky enough to be back on, I'll bring the fire. Here's what I really have to say, especially about this. How are we supposed to check what he said when they took it down? This is part of the problem. Kyle's got to rely on his memory. I hear that there's some guy online who's got all of the episodes downloaded. You have to contact him and he'll send you one. By the way, whoever you are, please send them to me. I've been trying to get in touch. But all of this is important whenever it comes to the delineation of language, because I see these dishonest morons online saying, Joe is corporate media. He works for a corporation. Okay, you really want to play this game? Establishment media. It's very clear. Here is the thing. The Joe Rogan experience will probably never ever be allowed to happen again because it slipped through the cracks. It was never supposed to be this way. He will be the first person to tell you that. And so because they never had a hand in molding it, in booking it, in shaping it, in promoting it, any of that. He never did any PR, ads, interviews. That makes it so that when it becomes so much bigger than them, it is a direct threat to their authority. And that is what it is all about. That's what that clip was about. That's what the censorship, as you pointed out over the weekend, of the right and the left guests. It's about power and it's about control. And the dishonest actors out there pretending to care about this clip of Joe saying the N-word, they are the biggest hypocrites on the planet. Apply the same standard then to Joe Biden and to Howard Stern and to so many of the people in American public life. Obama, like I said previously, right? Context doesn't matter. Okay. I mean, This is part of the thing whenever we come down to litigating this without any context, without any good faith, and especially whenever we try to make it all about using race in particular as a cudgel and to make it so that these words lose meaning. And by the way, if you care about race and race relations in this country, you don't want that. You want these to have the real palpability that they originally had to maintain the power of the attack and the label in the first place, because they have erased it from all of our discourse. Millions of people out there, they see through this. They know exactly what's happening. And so, like I said, I would be saying all of this in this defense if I never met Joe Rogan. I've been a fan of his from a long time. When I was a young guy riding the metro, the funniest thing is I told you, the most controversial things that he believes are that the Sphinx is like 10,000 years old. Okay? So, personally, big archaeology should be the people who should be trying to...
I mean, there's a lot to be said about the...
Yeah.
And this is the other thing that upsets me about this is, if you're a kind of normie person,
I get it too.
This has penetrated to the point that my mom's talking to me about it.
Yeah. My girlfriend's sisters are like, what's going on with
the
Joe
only
Rogan?
podcast? My mom just figured out how to listen to my podcast. Okay, seriously, in the last month. So it has broken through to the entire world. I told you before when we were talking about this, my friend who was in Brazil back home visiting her family was like, what's going on with Rogan? All the Brazilian radio stations are talking
Bolsonaro
about
apparently is defending him.
Yeah,
So that's part of the
okay,
reason.
thanks.
Yeah.
But to get back to your point about race, and just to use Joe Biden as an example here, think of the harm that Joe Biden has done to Black people in this country through his career. Think about the crime bill and mass incarceration and the drug laws and his involvement in creating the crack cocaine mass disparity. I mean, you want to talk about people who have really harmed Black people in this country? Please, saying this word in context and as part of quoting people, this pales in comparison. And the only reason I say this is, and this is something I'll talk about a little bit more in my monologue, to point out what a silly distraction all of this is from the real work of making this country and this world a better place. It comes down to Do you trust the people in this country to be grown-up adult Americans to be able to listen to a podcast that may have things that are a little edgy or even sometimes blatantly offensive and not be able to like turn into the KKK? Do you actually trust your fellow human beings here to participate in a democracy? Because that's what this comes down to. And if the answer is no, then we're in a really bad place. I do want to say, even though this feels like this tidal wave of like mass public outrage, I do think that this is like a relatively elite online conversation where the voices are extremely loud. But most people that I think are going about their normal days have a lot deeper concern than what Joe Rogan said on a podcast in 2011. However, that doesn't mean that the fight doesn't matter, because these are the people who, number one, have disproportionate power. And number two, it's really sad because they're also oftentimes the people who, in another era, their activist impulses would have been part of an effort for real collective change, rather than just like policing people's language and like desperately urging tech oligarchs to claim even more power. And so that really undercuts our ability to have a democracy in this country when, number one, you don't trust your fellow human beings to engage in that democracy and not be like so thrown off course by a podcast that we can't coexist. And number two, where our greatest activist impulses are channeled towards helping the powerful become even more powerful. So that's one of the things that is really troubling about this, and why I think we've focused so much time on it, because it is part of this really larger fight of what kind of a country are we going to live in? Is it going to be a democracy? Is it going to be a police state? What are we going to spend our time and collective energies doing? Are we going to be policing podcasts from 2011? Or are we actually going to try to do something for the collective good? And I just want people to know that, you know, I don't begrudge anyone who like listens to these words or these old jokes or whatever and feels like this was really offensive and this wasn't okay. But I want you to understand that this was not some organic, like mass outrage. This was orchestrated. It is a hatchet job. And at bottom, it's about power and money and who has control.
Yeah, power, money, and control. And, you know, in a way, to your monologue's point, they're gaslighting all of us into trying to make us focus. And luckily, we have this show so that we can talk about Rogan and we can talk about all the stuff.
Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut, our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it. You get to ask us questions, all that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.